Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to our POP listeners. POP, as you know, is called Presenting Our Presence. It's a podcast that highlights and features and amplifies the voices of our Indigenous colleagues here at the University of Alberta. It's co-hosted by myself, Cindy Gaudet, and Florence Glanfield, with the help of our technical sovereign guru, helper, Kyle Napier. And today we have a returning guest from a previous episode. If you haven't listened to it, please go listen to her, Sherri Kuss, who's coming back to co-host with her colleague and friend, Karen Vande Vyvere. So welcome back, Sherri, and welcome to this POP session, Karen, and so glad you were able to join us today. I'll pass it to you and you can introduce yourself in a way that's meaningful and makes sense to you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you for having me here. Sherri, thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a member of the Alberta Métis Association, and I work with the University of Alberta Engineering Co-op Department, and I've been there almost 20 years working with students and employers helping to place students. I'm a member of the Métis Association of Alberta, but I'm also, it's just one little tenuous connection to Manitoba. My grandmother was a combination of Waniandi and Kalio. Happy to be here.
Super, Karen. Well, we're so happy to have you. And you 20 years at the U of A. That is impressive. Can you tell us a little bit of what your 20 years have been like? Have you been at that Faculty of Engineering for 20 years?
I have. I started there. It's 20 years next June. I'm sort of amplifying it a bit here. But I started a similar job. I started working with recruiting for finding jobs for engineering co-op students. Of course, the program has just grown hugely since when I started. Before that, I would last about three years in a job, and I had to change. And this job I absolutely love it. I love the environment of working with the university. I love working with students. I have the best team I've ever worked with, and a lot of these people have been there all the time too, and even the new people, it's a fantastic team. So it's basically made it impossible to want to leave. There's never ending challenges, and with the changes there's always opportunity to contribute with new ideas. And I don't like change, but I love change. So it's that you get both. You get lots of that here. And with working, anytime you work with students and people, it's never a boring moment, right? You feel like you're doing something that matters.
So true. I always remind myself when I'm working with students why I'm still where I am. They keep us going, keep us fresh in our thinking and relevant in what we do. So I know you and Sherri have worked with one another for years also. And Sherri, you kind of had the inspiration you wanted when we invited you to think of someone you wanted to have a conversation with. Right away, you said, I want to have a conversation with Karen. And so I'll just pass it to you to just share maybe a little bit of that context of what the two of you do together as Métis women at the Faculty of Engineering.
Thank you, Cindy. And one of the things that I will just go back in time a little bit. I joined the Faculty of Engineering in 2007, and Karen was there. And we spent several years working alongside each other, appreciating each other as colleagues and friends. And I think it came about maybe a few years after we'd started working together that, hey, my background is Métis. And Karen's like, well, my background is Métis. And it was at a time when I think we didn't really, how do I put this, Karen? And I've talked about this before, maybe didn't really acknowledge it too much, because historically in my professional career, that wasn't something that was of value or of benefit to a career. So Karen and I started talking, and then we started talking about kind of family background and lineage and all of these things. And I think Karen, at one point you brought in this great big huge document. It was like a a poster-sized thing with all of these different links, and we had a really wonderful conversation, and really started to talk about identity and belonging. And I don't want to talk for Karen, but we talked about kind of sharing a link to our grandmothers and our mothers and our lineage, and how we identify as Métis women, or maybe how we didn't identify as Métis women. And I know I've personally kind of struggled a little bit with my sense of belonging and identity, and where I grew up, where that culture was not only not valued, but maybe not acknowledged. Now, I'm not going to take anything away from Karen's own personal story here, but I would really like to learn or hear Karen talk about her journey with this as well, because I think it's an important one that we share.
Thanks so much, Sherri. Boy, it's so true. I really appreciated when you first started talking to me. My grandmother was in residential school. None of us, well, I didn't know it until about 10 years ago. My mother was kind of in denial. She did have some racism directed to her. I heard her a couple times say it, but when I would say, I was really drawn to the culture and I didn't know why. So we lived, my mom's family was around just outside Saddle Lake, and we always had Indigenous people. We all played guitars and fiddles, and all the community would come in and we dance and sing, and that was just how we interacted along with eating. And it was like a big, large, warm, loving, extended family, and I loved it. I felt so belonging there, and I play the guitar, and I want to learn the fiddle better than I do, and I love singing. My grandmother I was really close to. She was very quiet, the best person I've ever met, but she never discussed much. And I know my mom, I would say, well, I think I'm Indigenous, and she'd say, no, you're not. I'm not either. And so I'd be all confused and think, okay, well, I don't, and she'd say, Grandma didn't go to a residential school. She went to a convent. And so I just left it. And a couple of my aunties would say, no, it was a residential school. And it was still about 10 years ago, whenever they were giving up, the government was going to be destroying all these records. So I thought, well, I'm just going to try and get these records. And I got them. And it was such a shock to see it, that she went in at age 6 with her younger sisters or older sister, her sister speaking only Cree. And I never knew she even spoke Cree. And she died quite young, in about 72. So I never knew this about her. I never had a chance to talk to her about this. And then I saw much of it was redacted, but I saw the Indian agent. She was one of the priests at the school said she was very bright woman, and she wanted to go continue her education I think she was 14 or 15 in Edmonton. And the Indian agent's letter was horrific, saying, no, she doesn't know Indian woman needs further education or something. It was awful. And then it made me think of my grandma, because she was so quiet and so good. And did she learn that? To be quiet and good as survival? I wish I could have a big conversation with her now. So that was yes, she was, and it explained a few things, because when I first went to university, I decided I was really drawn, and I took this in a Cree language and culture course, and there was some lateral violence there, because I was told I was just a wannabe by somebody in the class. And I was crushed at the time, because I thought, well, I guess I am, because I really am not. I was so confused. I still am a little bit, but it's getting better. And my grandmother heard, my mom must have told her. And my grandmother, we were there for a week or whatever, a weekend, and my grandmother took me aside and she said, you're the only person who has been drawn to this intuitively. And she said, I want you to have my mother's Cree prayer book when I die. And I said, your mother has a Cree prayer? Like, it was just stunning, but she didn't say anything else. And so I think, and my aunties think, she had the Indigenous sort of wiped out of her. She learned to keep it hidden. She did say she was treated fairly well there by the nuns, not by the priests. And she did say to my aunties, this is relayed by my auntie, that it was partially because she wasn't as dark as some of the other students. So what did she learn from that? And what did, that passed on, and it has impacted the family. So I never claimed this because I never felt I had the right to claim it. I'm white facing. I am mostly settler. But because I always felt so connected, because my dad was Air Force, I'm rambling a bit here. So we moved all over Canada and Europe. And then we settled when I was about 12. My mom wanted to be around her family. So we settled out west here in Alberta. And so most of my time was with my mom's family. We had a piece of land we bought together called the land. And we would gather there all the time, all our holidays, all our weekends, playing guitar and music and eating and laughing, just everybody laughing. And I didn't feel I could claim it until I found that those records saying grandma was in residential school and that she spoke Cree. It's like I started tentatively telling people, and I still ran into some stuff like, well, you're not really Métis because you can't trace anything back to Red River. And I did find one relative, but I'm claiming it. And the reason I'm claiming it is because my grandmother was silenced. Her reality was silenced. And so I'm wanting to claim this more for my grandmother. I want to acknowledge her. I want to say how wonderful she was and what a crime it was that she didn't continue speaking Cree and sharing that with us, and that she must have hid part of herself for a good part of her life. And it's just sad, but I'm not going to silence her. Before I felt like, well, I couldn't claim her because people are saying you aren't really this. Some people would say that. It's like, no, she existed. I am of her, and I am so glad and proud to be of her. So that's part of where I am. I still struggle a little bit, but I am getting more vocal and claiming it. And there's also something, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but I do a lot of painting outdoors, and I'm by myself in remote areas. And I've had a couple of scary moments with people. And I'm so aware that if I looked like my mother or my grandmother or some of my cousins, that I would be at much greater risk. So I felt fraudulent hiding behind the safety of my whiteness as well. I need to claim for that reason as well. I need to claim that, to say I am Indigenous as well. And I'm proud of it. And I need to speak up more. So thank you for asking that question.
Wow, Karen, that's so powerful. Like, it's unbelievably powerful. I have one other thing I want you to speak about, if you don't mind. I have always admired and been very inspired by your creativity and talent with music and art, and it's something that I'm just so thrilled to know you, because you have this talent, and somehow you bring that part of you to everything that you do. Your creativity, your intuition, your approach to problem solving, and how you work with students. And I'm really just humbled by it. I think it's maybe rooted in your connection to who you are. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, like how your passion and creativity, and like she's a professional artist. She's pretty humble about it too.
Thanks so much, Sherri. I've always been kind of a weirdo. And I think that's my creativity. I do see things, I love seeing the big picture and then zeroing in on components of it. And as much as I fight change in my own life, I found the change I've been pushed into, that wouldn't have been my choice, has been good. And it might take 5 or 6 years to recognize that for me. But so I've learned that some of the things I thought were the worst in my life were not the worst. And so that I shouldn't fear change. I should embrace it. And I love solving problems. I absolutely love it. And in this job, we get to do that with students. One thing that helps me is my sense of connectedness to this land. And that developed, I always drew and painted, and since I was childhood, I was mostly fascinated with people's faces and the angles between the eyes and the nose and things like that. But I have no interest in landscape. But to get better, I learned you have to paint from life. So I started painting outdoors, and now that's all I want to do. And I've learned to really see. I've learned to really see how beautiful the little scruff grass is growing out, and even the bugs. I'm part of this. Like when the mosquitoes are biting me, I might not be thinking this lovingly about them, but I'm serving a purpose too by being there. I'm part of the whole, and it just has completely captured me, that sense of how I am part of this whole. I'm going to feed this earth one day as well, and I'm taking from it now. And I find that, and it's not, and so that also helps me with being the combination of Indigenous and settler. I am a human being first and foremost. And I am with all these other animals and creatures at the same time on this beautiful planet. And I feel compelled to try to improve it if I can. And I'm, to combat my lazy side. And that can help with students. Engineering students are going to make a difference in the world. They have the opportunity to really change things. And so that helps sometimes in the companies I approach to hire our students. I seek out certain companies because I want those opportunities to be there for our students. It sometimes comes up in discussion with students if they're open to it, if they initiate that, if that's their interest as well, when we meet to do meetings with them. Thinking outside the box is fun for me. It's like play. So at work, when we have changes, I really like to challenge myself. I have this tendency to just like everybody to want to, let's stick with what we know. It's easier. But I love to step back and say, well, let's think of this from a different perspective. And I like thinking of things in nature because if what's been solved by nature, if we can somehow modify that to serve us, because it's so perfectly happens in nature that why reinvent it? Let's look at things and then think about how they can be used again. So I get that chance to do it in work because of the changes in process, and with our students. I'm hoping that with some of the companies that I bring on, that maybe we'll have more students interested in areas that will help this beautiful planet that we're on.
Powerful. Sherri, I have a couple threads that are pulling at me, and that I wonder, it's like how you're claiming that relationship and reclaiming and then giving it a voice through the art. And I always think about the power of art and music as it's another form of knowledge, right? And so I'm curious. So these are all kind of the and then the beauty, and then how seeing the beauty is emerging through your work and your art, which inevitably, I'm sure, influences being with students. So you mentioned something that you love problem solving. So you made me think, is there something that influences? So there's a way of thinking about problem solving where it's like, you've got a problem and I'm going to solve it for you. However, I have a sense that how you approach problem solving comes from a whole other perspective. And I think it's important to think about problem solving in a new way. So I'd love to hear from you how you think about problem solving, how do you make meaning of it, and yeah, who or what influences thinking creatively about problems. I love it.
Wow, that is a great and a tough question. Cindy, I don't know if I've analyzed it. I think of it as not solving somebody's problem. I don't think there's any one solution. I'm a firm believer in that, not thinking, oh, here is the solution. I think I like seeing problems and then trying to like stand back and walk around it and look at it from, fly above it, get underneath it, just let it sit in my bones for a bit. And I feel like I can invite everything that is into that if I listen, if I'm open to listening. And then, and that would be ancestors, and that would be current people, and that would be, it's just letting whatever wants to speak. And so sometimes I will get possible ideas there, but I'm not great at problem solving by myself. And I love coming up with the ideas as I circle around it, but I really need the strength of others to refine that, or to see from their own perspective, because I can only do that so well in somebody else's shoes. I really am just guessing at what that really is like. So for their perspective to come in and look at it as well, then maybe we can together find a solution that will work for this problem for now. Or maybe we'll find 2 solutions and have to pick 1 or 3. So that's kind of, I don't know if I've answered, but that's my approach is, I love to sit and think, and I really need a lot of alone time to just be and to think. And again, it kind of boils down to, I love thinking about life and why we're here and all this sort of stuff, and how everything interconnects. And I think even the spiritual stuff I have, to me, it's got to be explainable somehow, but we just don't have the means to do it. We don't understand it. So I need that space, and I need that time, and I'm looking for connections again. That's essentially, it's looking for connections that I'm not aware of, whether they're intuitive or whether they're coming from somewhere else. It's just looking for those connections that might solve the problem, and that's working with others too. So it's like a big bunch of tentacles in there.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing, like, I'm thinking about our grandmothers, and I get that whole generation who didn't speak about identity, and sometimes I'm like, but the living and the value system is still there. Like, those ways of how you're problem solving within an academic context is how our relatives would have problem solved in relation, in community, in connection, in prayer, to come up with how to best move forward collectively, and it's like, wow, imagining that was an approach that's valued. Right. And so anyway, just super excited about, that this rethinking and it shifts out of what's the problem or who's the problem. Right. It's a real shift. And then it's like Kiyuke, when it's like visiting, right? It's like you're sitting around your fire back on that land playing different instruments, and there's laughter, and then there's debates, and then there's songs. And then there's stories. Yeah, this is the visual that is coming as I'm listening and imagining and reimagining that space and that way of problem solving. Yeah, it's not linear. I could go on and on, but I'm gonna pass it on to Sherri if you have any wonders.
I'm just going to quickly say thank you for what you just shared, Cindy. I have not thought of it as a way of being, and that further connects me. So when you were saying that, I was getting shivers. I feel like I am around a fire, and you are all around it with me, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you.
I feel very, very connected to this community here in our virtual room. Thank you. Thank you for that, Karen. Uh, again, you inspire me in so many different ways. There's one topic that kind of comes to mind, and I know you and I have talked about it, and it might not be a very comfortable topic. Are you okay if we kind of talk about something, and then we can, certainly not, yeah. One of the things that I worry about and think about is the perception of people like me and maybe like yourself being able to just check a box. Okay, I can check that box now. And I know you've heard this comment. It's like, oh, is that how you got to where you are? Are you the equity hire? Are you the equity? And this was why you and I didn't say anything and share anything when we first started, right? I think things have changed now, but how do we help our community, our people like us, not feel that?
That's another great question and another tough one. I don't know that I have those. I know I don't have those answers. I know I am suspicious even when companies hire, when they're like, can you get us your Indigenous students? Something in me is suspicious. And it might be authentic. So I hate to judge, but it just feels like looking good. It's about wearing the nice outfit and the right hair. And it's just, and I don't mean to diminish companies that do that, because I think there's really an intent. But I've talked to a couple of the Indigenous students I've worked with, and they very much feel that. And they feel, I talked to one student last year, and he's graduated, but he had some great suggestions. And I haven't known how to really act on that, other than he wanted more. So hiring is great, increasing the opportunities, but people don't always disclose because it isn't always safe to disclose, depending on where you're applying. I think the reality is there's some places that it's not safe to disclose, and they don't want to be, like, oh, that's how you got this job, Karen. They don't want that to happen to them either. But he suggested that they have more specific supports, financial supports, things like that will help students. We need to think about it more. Where I came to is, when I talk to my companies that want to hire Indigenous students, I'm going to be more honest. I'm just going to be more genuine and say this has to come from a place, and not say it so it's a negative thing, but just to try to explain the perceptions that might exist because of the historical realities, and to stress that authenticity, to really look inwards for the company and for the hiring people, to really look inwards and to think in terms of to take Indigenous Canada course, to train themselves, and then rethink your approach. And that's the only thing I've come up with so far. And I've talked to a couple of companies about that already, highly suggesting they take Indigenous Canada. And that will help give them an understanding. It's not wrong, but I'm learning from that course. I'm partway through it. I'm learning a profound amount. So if they can take that time, then that shows a certain level of authenticity as well. And just to be real. If we're all real with each other, I think things are better. That's my little idea.
Well, yeah.
I was just saying, thank you, Karen. I know I put that wasn't a question I really initially thought of when we were talking about connectivity and in some of but it's something that I find is maybe a bit uncomfortable. And by talking about the uncomfortable, we can be a bit solutions focused around effective change, right? And I love what you said about authenticity. Over to you, Cindy.
And I think, Sherri, to build on that is also back to that problem solving piece. How will we address this issue of employment and employers who want to check the box when they hire us, all of us, with them, and then with students as well? And what do we need to do to speak up? Because I love your piece around when we reclaim the strength to speak up, and how are you going to equip yourself or educate yourself to be prepared, but not, it's kind of like addressing the tokenism, because that's another form of harm, right? And when you're engaging with employers to say, how are you going to prepare yourself or understand how systemic systems of oppression have operated in this country, that you are not operating from that place? What will you do to take responsibility for that, right? So by hiring is not enough. So I love that. Almost like not a buffer, but how will you prepare yourself for the brilliance of what our students bring, our colleagues, one another to the table? Because we will problem solve differently. We will think about curriculum differently. We will think about relationship differently. We will think about collegiality. We will that's all that we're also bringing to the table, and the stories of our grandmothers that we're carrying, and their strength and their struggle, right? So beautiful. Yeah, so powerful. And the last piece I wanted to speak of, and then I'll pass it to you, Karen, for final words you might want to share with our pop listeners, is you've made today what's invisible visible, in that sense of you could almost feel the tangibleness of what we think is invisible, but is so darn visible to us all the time. And it's increasingly visible when we come together, which is what POP has emerged out of, presenting our presence, making what we do visible, not beyond just our identity, but that's all tied to our identity. Kyle, before we pass to Karen, do you want to chime in? Do you have a wonder you want to add to the conversation?
I do, yeah. Thank you for checking in. And so, Karen, I'm looking at your relationship with the university, as with many people's, is complex and multifaceted, and there are many different communities on campus. And so, I'm curious if your connection to community has helped inform your role, which I'm seeing as the employer relationship manager, and I'm seeing a lot of letters next to that. It seems like your title's pretty long. Do you mind? First of all, it's a two-tier question now, sharing what is your role, just so I understand what it is, and then whether your ancestral connection to community and Métis identity has informed your practice in your role on campus.
Thanks. So I'm an ERM, which isn't, you had it right, employer relationship manager. So when we first started, we worked with students and employers at the same time, and that role changed about 2 years ago. So now my main role is to work to bring employers into the fold, to keep hiring our students and to maintain those relationships with so that we keep finding jobs for our increasing number of students. I still get to mark their papers, and I get to visit students. As part of their grades, they have to have an on-site visit, and they have to have an end-of-term evaluation. So I'm still lucky enough to get to go visit students and meet their employers and see how they're doing, to have those chats. And that builds the relationship as well with the university, because employers by and large are pretty happy to have us come by, and the students are too. And it's such a gift to see students. My connections to community are helping me with what I do with students, but I didn't claim it. This has been a long process, so I didn't claim it really. So I've struggled with this, and so I don't think it's helped me as much as it could have all along. The past probably 3 or 4 years It's been growing, and it's growing all the time now. And I think about it much more, and almost it is who I am. And so I'm thinking in terms of that when I visit students, when I talk to students, and letting them know, I almost wish I could say I have, on my title or something, just so students, because a lot of students don't self-identify, so that they could know maybe this is a safe discussion they could have. And I don't know how, that's something that I've just been percolating. I don't have where I'm going yet, but my sense of community, with connection to community, impacts it definitely. And it's a larger community. It's the community of humans, and how we're all on this little ball of blue in the middle of all this space and it's a pretty small ball in that context, and it's pretty delicate. And so I'm thinking in terms of the larger community and the personal one, and how can we make a change? How can we, trying to reinforce the students, you guys you have the ability to really change the world with what you have, your skill sets. How are you going to approach this, right? Have you thought of this or thought of that? And some you wouldn't go there because it's not what they want, but most people are very interested and receptive to that. So it's growing. I'm not as where I want to be yet, but I am on my way.
Well, super. We're almost running out of time. So I want to invite you, Karen, if you have a few last words, either it's to students or to Imagining Who Pop listeners, to share with us, and Sherri also. And then we'll close.
I just want to say thank you so much, Sherri. This has been, for inviting me to do this. I was thinking, well, what am I going to say? and it's actually been therapeutic for myself as well. And to listen to Cindy and Kyle and you, Sherri, it's just, pop itself, I've got to tell you, has been so helpful. Each one I listen to, I learn more. And it helps my sense of connection. And it helps my ability to take, to claim my heritage. So I love this whole program. And so thank you. Gratitude to everybody. Thank you.
I guess I just will layer on to what you've said, Karen. Thank you so much. Your grandmother would be proud. We are very connected. She's visible.
Sherri, I got goosebumps with that. And I do want to say merci, Karen, for helping us all grow, because that's what I feel today was as well. It was helping us grow, helping me grow, and helping our community of pop listeners to grow as well through your experience of growth, through your sharing, your teachings, your knowledge, and everything that you're doing at the University of Alberta. And yes, I'm merci, and hi.